Let's fam. Peace and blessings. This is Derric Moore. And in this video, I wanted to talk about working with spirits from a Kemetic perspective. You may have already have guessed, basically from looking at some of my videos. Those of you who, you've watched my videos, you've kind of followed the blog and what have you. You know that I'm really into dealing with working with the ancestors and working with spirits. And I kind of want to give an explanation or kind of give you a little bit of insight into or as to why I'm even doing this video and why I'm even talking about it from that perspective. The one thing that a lot of people don't understand about Kemetic spirituality, or about the Kemetic society, I should say, is that the Kemetic people the Kemetic society was a cosmopolitan society, all right? And what I mean by that is there was not just one ethnic group or one tribal nation that existed there, okay? The Kemetic society consisted of numerous ethnic groups or numerous tribal nations. And a lot of times when we read about, the Kemetic history and what have you, that is one of the things that's not being reported. And because it's not being reported, it kind of does not help us in regards to our spiritual development. All right. So it's like, for instance, when I'm saying it's not being reported, I'm saying that's not what's written in the history books. And this kind of ties in. I'll show you how this ties into our whole subject matter here shortly. All right. To kind of give you an idea of what I mean when I'm saying it's not, they don't really report this. The historians and archaeologists, they don't report this. Imagine 1,000 years into the future. Okay, let's say 1,000 years in the future, there was some extraterrestrials. They decided to come down, they came from outer space and they came to, United States, and they're digging around and what have you, and they found Obama's diary or Obama's book, that book he wrote or whatever. And based upon that book, they would look at it and everything, and they would say, okay, well, based upon what Obama wrote in this book, well, African Americans, they all come from Kenya, or they all come from Hawaii, wherever Obama was born and raised in. They would say that they all practice this type of religion. They all live this way. They all could play basketball, or, all that other stuff that they talked about that made Obama popular. Would that be an accurate depiction of people of African descent in the United States? No. Okay. Would that be an accurate depiction of everybody, all the people in general that lived in the United States? No. Okay. It wouldn't be an accurate depiction, but this is the same kind of depiction that we have whenever they're talking about the Kemetic people. All right. We rely upon these archaeologists and historians all they've done, they've just gone into, these tombs or they've gone into, these temples and what have you. And they're like, okay, well, basically based upon the artifacts that we've recovered, based upon the archaeological records, the text and all this is how the Kemetic people lived. And what they're only seeing, or what they're not showing you, is that that's a snapshot of the people of the monarchy, okay? It doesn't give a whole depiction of all the people who lived in the Kemetic society, or all the people who made up the Kemetic society, all right? Now, just think about that for a second. If you think about the fact that the Kemetic people, they consisted of numerous ethnicities, All right, numerous ethnicities. That would explain the reason why when Butch and other scholars, other historians and archaeologists, they could trace and say, okay, well, these people over here that we call the Dogon, they have a whole lot of cultural traits that are very similar to the Kemetic people. They can say, oh, okay, well, these people over here, the Yoruba, they have a whole lot of similar traits to the Kemetic people. And the reason why they can say that, or the reason why we can, they can do that kind of speculation and what have you, is based upon, of course, cultural analysis and what have you. But that right there lets you know that once upon a time, either this entire tribal, this entire tribal nation, once upon a time they lived in Kemet, or there were some descendants or what have you from Kemet that, that migrated to that region. Okay, so what I'm saying is basically Kemet consists of numerous ethnic groups, numerous tribal nations. Okay, this is pretty much what they refer to themselves, tribal nations or clans. Okay, it consists of numerous groups, and all of these groups of people, they basically have their own specific way of, performing or, practicing their spirituality. This is all what made up Kemetic spirituality. The fact that we are dependent upon, or the fact that people are dependent upon what archaeologists and historians are saying, that's just one depiction. It doesn't show the full picture of it. Okay? Now, part of the reason why I'm saying that is because, like I said, if you've seen any of the other videos, you've read my blogs or anything, you know that there is a strong Kongo influence that I keep talking about. And it is from that Kongo influence that I draw my inspiration from. And this is basically, it's a difference. The difference between the way the Kongo people did things compared to the way other, tribal nations and what have you done things is completely different. It's very different. Okay, it's a different spiritual technology, different spiritual approach. It is similar. There are some a lot of strong similarities, but it's a completely different deal. Okay, so that being said, when it comes to actually working with spirits from a Kemetic perspective, there's a video in which I did, in which I said, before you set up an ancestor altar, what you need to do is determine or see how do you receive spiritual information, determine what type of psychic ability or psychic skill that you have. Part of the reason for doing that, or part of the reason for saying that, is because if you just go ahead and you set up an altar, you don't know if the spirit is talking to you, what spirit is talking to you, if it's a benevolent spirit or a malevolent spirit, if it's a spirit or trickster spirit. You don't know what it is. Okay. One of the things that you have to understand, and this is what I kind of went into in regards to a couple of other videos, is that we live in this physical reality. And because of us living in this physical reality, we don't see the other side of our universe. We don't see the spiritual side of our universe. So as a result, a lot of times we think that if we just set up an altar or whatever, we can automatically just start working with a spirit, or we can just start working with some kind of divinity or so. And it doesn't necessarily work that way. All right. From my perspective, from my experience, you have to have some kind of, you have to have some assistance. All right. You have to have some assistance to work with anything from the spiritual perspective. If you do not have any assistance, if you don't have any kind of guides or any of that, you run into a whole lot of problems. All right. And I know that's a little hard for a lot of us to believe, because especially if you're raised in the West, you're raised in, United States and what have you, where we've been taught and we've been trained not to believe in anything unless we can actually assess it with our 5 physical senses. So a lot of times we go at this with a lot of disbelief and we don't believe in it. But I'm telling you, you have to have some kind of spiritual guides. You have to have some kind of spiritual assistance. All right. And the whole purpose of saying, before you set up an altar, determine what type of psychic skill or psychic sense you have, is because this way you can kind of tune in and you can find out how spirits are talking to you. How do you get that insight? How do you get spiritual information or anything that is verifying something of that spiritual nature? Okay. So like, for instance, as I was saying, before you set up an ancestral altar, you need to determine, do you receive messages through dreams? Do you receive messages through visions? Do you hear messages? Do you sense them? Do you physically sense them or so? That right there will help you in regards to working with spirits from a Kemetic perspective. All right. Now, if you figured out and you know what your psychic sense is, then what happens is, when you start setting up your ancestral altar, okay, what happens is that your ancestors, they will, based upon their spiritual development or so, based upon what they see that you're trying to do, your ancestors will try to connect you with your spirit guide. Now, it's not that your spirit guides, they don't communicate with you and all that kind of stuff. It's none of that. It's just that your ancestors, they are the bridge that connect you to anyone or everyone out in the spiritual world, because they're the ones that know you. You know them. You don't necessarily, or we don't necessarily know our guides. We don't know our guides, even though our guides are always with us, and there are quite a few of them, or some of them that have been with us, since birth. We don't really have a rapport with them. So we have to build that rapport, just like you build a rapport with, anybody out, anybody out in the physical world. You have to build a rapport. So you build that rapport with your ancestors. Once you go ahead and you start working with your ancestors, and I know a lot of people, they say, oh, well, we don't work with ancestors. But like I said, that's not my approach. All right. That's not what I've learned, and it's not been in my experience. When you work with your ancestors, meaning you're building that rapport, you already know who your ancestors are, and you start building a rapport, and they start to understand, hey, I'm receiving this offering, or I'm receiving this to strengthen me, and in return, I'm going to strengthen my descendants. When you start working with your ancestors, building the rapport with your ancestors, strengthening the rapport, I should say, with your ancestors will go ahead, biological ancestors, they will set you up and connect you with your spirit guides. All right. And from your spirit guides, from building that relationship or that rapport with your spirit guides through your ancestors, your spirit guides, they're the ones that help you to learn about other spirits or the divinities or so from a Kemetic perspective. All right. That's pretty much, from my experience, that's how it works. All right. And when I'm saying they would help you, they would help you with this, they'll help you work with the other spirits and all that kind of stuff. What I mean by that is they'll show you how to build an altar. They'll show you how to connect with the netchars, or some people call them netaru. I prefer to call them, or I've been told to call them netchars. Okay. But they'll help you. They'll show you how to build whatever it is, they'll tell you, hey, you need this type of, this icon, you need this type of earth, you need this type of herb, you need this type of stone, you need all these, you need certain, this type of stick, they'll tell you the things that you need in order for you to build that altar space to represent that natural root energy. But if you don't have a rapport with your guide, it's going to be kind of hard for you to get that information. If you don't have a connection, or if you haven't started working with your ancestors, it's going to be hard for you to connect with your guide. If you don't know what type of psychic sense you have, it's going to be kind of hard for you to be able to hear what your ancestors are talking to you about, so that you can connect with your guide, so that your guide can go ahead and show you any of these things. Okay, so I just wanted to share that with you and try to get you to understand. As I've stated before, we have a unique experience. Those of us who are African descendants of slaves in North America, particularly United States, we have a unique experience. And hopefully by me sharing that with you, it would give you a little bit more insight and kind of explain why the videos that I've put out, why they are being put out the way they are. Why I'm talking about the difference between Ma'at and Ma'at. Why I am explaining and saying why you need to, before you set up an ancestral altar, why you need to find out what your psychic sense is, and all of this. Hopefully you'll start to get understanding, and you'll start to like I said, you'll start to listen, you'll start to hear what your spirits are saying, and they will help you in your progress. Okay, so as I've stated before, thank you for your support. Hopefully that helped you. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line. Thanks again. Hetapoo. Peace.